England is synonymous with exquisite tailoring, but what's the real cost of bespoke?
Ultimately, we all have our own style. We all have our own tastes. I like to think of bespoke suiting as multi-generational, that we've built them in a way that they can survive to be handed down.
We're here today in London at the Artisan Lounge, and I'm joined by Matthew. Hi, Matthew.
Good to see you, Jack. How are you?
Well, thank you. Matthew, tell us a bit about yourself.
It's not a great story, but as you can tell from my accent, originally from Long Beach, California. I studied fashion in Orange County, moved to London when I was 21, and started my tailoring career from there.
Awesome. So you're one of the UK's only American bespoke tailors, am I right?
As far as I know, there's not another bespoke tailor who's American. And as far as I know, there's been no other American to ever work on Savile Row.
Very cool.
So that's my only mini claim to fame, as it were.
That's awesome. So whereabouts have you worked on Savile Row, if you don't mind sharing?
So I've only worked in one Savile Row house,
Mhm.
but when I moved to London in 2007, my first gig was working with Tom Sweeney. That was at their original shop up just north of Oxford Street. And that was in 2008. And I was there for 7.5, 8 years
Okay.
before I moved on to Alfred Dunhill. And I was working with Dunhill for a year before I was brought on to Huntsman, and I was there for just shy of 4 years.
Awesome. Okay. So you've had a lot of experience of bespoke, especially within the UK.
Yes, yeah. I mean, all of my bespoke experience is UK based. Before, when I was in Los Angeles, I started my career as an alteration tailor.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I worked at a department store called Nordstrom's.
Mhm.
Some of your viewers and readers might know of it. But I was just learning how to really sew and make alterations, shorten sleeves, take in waists there. And that's what really led me into wanting to elevate my skills and see what the kind of pinnacle of this industry was.
I see. Because a lot of alterations happen on ready-to-wear garments, am I right?
Yeah. I mean, they do happen on bespoke garments as well, but I'd say most ready-to-wear garments can be altered because you want to really perfect that fit.
And I think that's one of the things that's quite interesting is that people tend to view ready-to-wear prices against bespoke prices. And I think that's that juxtaposition of, wow, bespoke is expensive. Is that your view as well?
I mean, it is expensive. I mean, I don't think there's any person who could reasonably argue that bespoke isn't expensive when you compare it to the rest of the fashion market. But the question is there value within that expense? When you go to a ready-to-wear shop, you are always going to compromise on something, whether it's material, whether it's the working conditions of the people who've made it, whether it's the quality, whether it's being priced based on design rather than any other physical element of the garment. You are paying a premium for something. And margins, as you may know, on most ready-to-wear is fairly high. When you get into the designer market, they're even higher. But no one becomes a bespoke tailor to get rich. I'd love to, but we should have been bankers if we wanted to make a lot of money. Bespoke tailoring is not a high margin industry, mainly because if we were to price what bespoke should be, the amount of clients and customers that would want to buy from us would be so infinitesimally small.
Interesting. If you were to give a rough breakdown of the areas where the most money is spent in bespoke,
Hmm.
where would you kind of pinpoint in that pie chart, I suppose, is the biggest cost?
The largest expense per suit is the making cost. So we're sitting in kind of the heart of St. James's right now, and my bespoke suits are made within a kilometer of this space. Um, My coat maker is still based on Savile Row. My trouser maker is based in Soho. So the fact that we have such a localized cottage industry in a major metropolitan city means that the cost of producing things is going to be very high. On top of that, it takes years for a waistcoat maker, a jacket maker, or a trouser maker to train. Typically 4 to 5 years to become fully qualified, meaning that they aren't making very much money as their during their apprenticeships. So they need to be kind of reasonably compensated for the rest of their career because they are producing some of the best suits and clothing in the world.
Yeah, definitely. So, and that's another thing that I think a lot of people don't understand about the bespoke industry is that when they come to a tailor, they're actually taking, or they're taking home the work of several people. It's not just one person that does everything head to toe. Am I right?
I mean, there are a very few, like a limited number of tailors that will make everything, but that has largely kind of been consigned to history. You're absolutely right. If we were to do a rough count, and we'll just walk through the process,
Sure.
um, I am a pattern cutter. And I don't know how many people actually know this, but within our community, there are two distinct roles. Tailor, which is the person who sews, and the cutter, which is the person who cuts patterns, does fittings. So strictly speaking, I wouldn't call myself a tailor when I'm out with my peers.
Okay.
I'd say I'm a cutter. Um, so I start out the process. Some larger houses will have a sales associate who will deal directly with clients and do sales, but because I'm a smaller enterprise, I look after my own clients. I will help with cloth selection, style details, lining choices, and then I take measurements. So once I've taken measurements, I then go and draft a pattern. A bespoke pattern is essentially a hand cut pattern that is for you based on a system that is developed over generations. I have, later on, if we're upstairs, I can show you my notebook. And it is just filled with all the pattern drafts that I've learned from the various cutters that I've worked with. And every single one was taught to them by the previous generation. And every time we always make our own little adjustments to it. So while I do write them down, this is still an industry that's largely based on oral tradition, which I think is just so poetic in itself.
It's kind of like a recipe
Exactly.
in that respect,
Yeah.
then.
Because I then often will annotate how I've differed from the person who taught me it, just so I know I can go back to that if needed. And like I said, I can show you those in a little bit. Um, so that pattern then goes to get cut. And when we cut cloth out, we actually don't call it cutting, we call it striking because we are striking the cloth with our chalk. So again, in the industry, I'll talk to other cutters and I'll say, "Oh, what do you got on this week?" I got a bunch of striking on. I have a bunch of recutting on. I have a bunch of drafting. So it's really about these specific individual elements of the job, which can be done by different people. Some of the larger companies will have strikers who their entire job is to strike the cloth and then move it on down the process so they have a little bit more efficiency.
So the world of bespoke is probably one of the few worlds where strike action is a very good thing.
Yes, exactly. But yeah, so we have the striking and then trimming. And again, larger companies, they will have a trimmer. And a trimmer is essentially someone who just takes the cut cloth and then adds all of the necessary canvases, linings, buttons, threads, shoulder pads to the job that is specified by the cutter. Because if you want a soft shoulder, then you need a certain width or a kind of thickness of shoulder pad. If you want a really strong square shoulder, you need a different shoulder pad. So the trimmer will then read all those notes, supply it with the necessary trimmings, and then it goes on to the coat maker or the trouser maker for basting. So, I mean, that's just a limited view. And then once you get into the tailoring, it goes even further with pocket makers, finishers, pressers. It just, the list goes on and on.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. Because on the trimming side of things, like you say, if you wanted a more structured shoulder on a jacket, then you'd need more padding.
Yeah.
So does that then have an increase in the cost of a bespoke suit?
Uh, it's really small on like the shoulder pad issue, but there are other elements that are more expensive. So I think surprisingly, um, having less lining in the jacket is much more expensive to make, because then you have to finish all the seams off that are kind of ways that they won't fray but also look aesthetically pleasing. So the tailor has to do more work in order to make that unlined jacket have the same life as a traditional bespoke.
Because I think it could be really easy to think that a jacket with less lining in it would be less expensive, but the reality is the opposite.
Exactly. Yeah. And then when you go into like the skeleton jackets, those even get more expensive, even though they have less canvas, less lining. So it's really weird. It's an inverse relationship, really.
Do you make a lot of those yourself?
I don't. I'll do half-lined jackets, but if someone wanted one, I would happily make one. I've made them in the past, but I haven't pushed that as a particular house style of mine, at least not yet.
Okay. So I see that you're wearing a seersucker today. Am I right in guessing that this has less lining in it?
No, this is a fully lined jacket. It's a soft shoulder. It's a softer canvas. Oh, sorry. It's a softer shoulder here. There's no wadding in the sleeve head. So one of the like really um, one of the standard cuts for most Savile Row houses these days is a rope shoulder. I don't like making a rope shoulder because my inspiration comes from 1950s, 60s America, when that really didn't exist. It was more of a flat shoulder line.
And just to clarify, the roped shoulder is when the sleeve head comes up and round and has
Yes.
a really
So
definite.
like your jacket has a rope shoulder. You can see because right here there is that kind of bulge. It looks like there's a bit of rope in it.
I see.
And
Okay.
the rope shoulder. If you look at images from the 60s especially, you're not going to see any roping.
So a much straighter line.
Now, what I find really interesting from kind of a historical element is that that is also true in British tailoring. Savile Row wasn't really producing rope shoulders in the 50s or 60s, or even before then. It was really from the late 60s, 70s onward that you start seeing it come through, probably most notably with Tommy Nutter. There are some really great kind of archive images that you can find where Tommy Nutter's rope shoulders are really pronounced. And I think that's really emblematic of the 1970s style tailoring, at least out of the UK, which just doesn't represent my story or my interests. Not that it doesn't look great, which I think it does, but for my own house style, I like a much softer silhouette.
For sure. No, I completely understand that. Tommy Nutter was extremely stylistic in his suits, very suppressed waists, like you say, such a wide rope shoulder.
Big lapels.
Yeah.
It was kind of looking at taking what was a classic male silhouette and seeing what the outer boundaries of it were without changing the silhouette drastically. It's weird because suiting, we are confined to kind of a quote unquote box. Menswear's menswear doesn't change that drastically, especially in the early to late 19th century. So Tommy Nutter really pushed the boundaries of how far you can take it with it still being considered a suit. And I think that there's a lot of ramifications of his work because we see then people really pushing the boundaries more and more in the 80s and 90s and kind of menswear and the fashion realm.
Interesting. So does the style of suit that you're cutting influence price?
Not particularly. It's not the style, because I said I don't really do the unlined skeleton jobs. That doesn't have a direct impact into the overall cost.
Sure.
But you can certainly, if you are doing a skeleton bespoke jacket, it would cost more just because the the price of making will go up by about 50%.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's incredibly expensive to make.
So is that the same for details like patch or flat pockets, or like a pleated back for shooting, for instance?
I would imagine that a better entrepreneur would.
Uh-huh.
I tend not to, just
Okay.
because I think you can get a little bit crazy with, oh, this cost this much more, and I have to add. I try to keep it relatively evenly priced. Most tailors base the price of their suits on the cost of cloth.
Okay.
So that's actually something that people are surprised to hear, because our making costs are fixed. We don't have uh, any economies of scale in terms of makers. If I make one coat with one coat maker, that's going to cost me the same as if I made 1,000 with him,
I see.
because I work with my main coat maker. He doesn't gain any efficiency by having more work, so he can't make more faster.
Because he's not a machine.
Exactly. So we know we have a relatively fixed cost when it comes to the tailors. But when we look at cloth, that's when we see a variable in price. So if I'm paying X amount per meter, or I'm paying 3X amount per meter, well, then that's going to have a direct impact on how much the suit will actually cost at the end of the day.
So what's the most expensive cloth you've cut?
I did a Vicuña suit and that was like about 1,500, 1,800 pounds a meter,
Wow.
which is incredibly expensive. Yeah, I mean, and the suit ended up costing 20,000 pounds or something like that.
Was it just a two-piece?
Yeah, it was a two-piece suit. And strictly speaking, we wouldn't advise anyone to get a Vicuña pair of trousers, because it's such a delicate cloth.
Sure.
It will disintegrate. The gentleman that purchased it, he was a little bit older, had a very large wardrobe, and didn't have any concerns about the rotation in his with his suits. So, I'm sure he was probably wearing that once a year at most.
So it was a real indulgence.
Yeah,
And just something unusual to have.
yeah.
So what cloth would you recommend a new person coming into Bespoke? It's their first commission. What would you recommend that they look for in a cloth?
Well, it's a difficult question because it really depends on their lifestyle. If it's a person who wants to wear a suit every day, then that's one pathway of thinking. If it's someone who just wants to wear it for occasions and events and weddings, well, then you're thinking of an entirely different type of cloth. So what I would say, instead of kind of giving you a cloth answer, look at your lifestyle, look at how hard you are on your clothing, look at how well you treat your clothing, and then make a decision that's going to kind of answer all of those different points. I'm very hard on my clothes. I wear them down very easily, so I look at clothes that are going to be really robust. That tends to mean that I wear heavier weight cloths, because those last longer.
Okay.
I mean, the seersucker in particular is a bit of an outlier, but also this is not a cotton seersucker. It's a 90% wool, 10% silk from Laurel Piana. The silk gives the yarn a little bit more kind of toughness in terms of longevity. So this has actually lasted really well. But normally I wear much heavier suits because, one, they tend to look much nicer, and they just work for my lifestyle.
Understood. Yeah, I get why a heavier cloth would be more of a workhorse in terms of I suppose, longevity, potentially versatility if you choose a fairly normal color, for want of a better term. Um, but yeah, that's quite interesting because I know that you wear a gun club check jacket quite often. It's quite a beautiful one.
Thank you.
Um,
And that's not particularly heavy. It's probably 13 ounces.
okay.
Uh, but to some, that would be very heavy. I don't think it's very heavy, but I think if you asked um, Italian tailors especially, they'd think that's overcoat weather.
Yes.
So again, it depends on where you're based. It depends on what your lifestyle is. I think, and I was actually telling this to a client the other day. She's commissioning some work for me, and she's new to bespoke tailoring. And she said, I want something that's really hard wearing. And I said, that's no problem. I said, these are like bulletproof. And she like gave me a look, and I didn't realize like this is a term that we use in the industry when it's a very heavy cloth. It's obviously not bulletproof, no, but that's how we describe it as, oh, that's like a bulletproof cloth. Like that's going to last you 30 years.
I'll be honest, I hear that quite a bit as well when talking to tailors and people in the industry. And because I'm a big fan of the James Bond films and the Kingsman series, I do secretly think to myself, that's cool.
Yeah, no, one of the she said to me, oh, well, one of these days you actually need to get a bulletproof cloth made, and then you're actually really living up to the to its description.
So when it comes to the making time of a two-piece suit, what sort of rough hours goes into each element of the jacket and the trousers, so to speak?
So in terms of getting a baste made, it takes a tailor roughly half a day to 3/4 of a full working day to get that made up. So once they're given it, they can make it in about, just less than a day. Then to actually take that from going to a finish, it takes a few days because there's so much work involved.
And just to clarify, that's days in terms of hours back to back.
Not like 24 hours, like so a full working day. So like an 8 to 10 hour working day.
Got it.
It would probably take 2 or 3 days to finish a jacket. Most tailors will describe their work capacity in jobs per week. So they'll say, I can guarantee 3 jobs per week. So that's someone who's fairly fast if you can do 3 finished coats a week. Usually for younger, newer tailors, it's about 1. For fairly established tailors, it's about 2. So if we use that as a basis, it takes approximately 2.5 full working days to finish 1 coat.
But the process from a customer's point of view takes longer.
Yeah, and that's because of the capacity issue.
I see.
If I only had 1 client and my coat maker only had me as the 1 client that was, giving him 1 job, then we could have a finished suit in 2 weeks.
Wow.
And that's also based on availability of the client coming in for fittings. But because we can't guarantee that we're only going to have 1 job on at any given time, we have to give ourselves appropriate lead times. Once we have 5 or 6 clients coming in, or 7 or 8, and then I have to make a pattern for each of them, well, if it takes me half a day to make a pattern, well, to make client 1 to 8's pattern, well, that's half a day, that's 4 days. So already I've lost 4 days of that lead time. And once I give those bastes to my coat maker, well, if it takes them nearly a day, well, that means we already have another 8 full working days until that's done. But that doesn't take into account work that is already on the go. So they might have finished jackets to make. So if they have 2 or 3 finished jackets to make at a rate of 2.5 days to finish a jacket, well, now we're seeing why we can't guarantee next day service, because we have to reasonably work for everyone in the same capacity. There are always exceptions. You know, if someone needs a suit and they're desperate for it, we can try to shave off a week or two. But generally, I want to be able to consistently tell all of my clients, you come in today and in 4 weeks that fitting is ready.
So that's another cost of bespoke that I think a lot of people kind of forget about, is the fact that they've got to come to you in order to have a fitting, have a consultation, whatever part of the process it is. There's a lot in the 21st century about online bespoke, but I think to get the best outcome, my personal experience is you've got to see the tailor in person.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
I
how
mean,
far, if you don't mind me asking, how far and wide do your do your customers travel for you?
so I have a small contingent in the US. Mostly my client base is here in the UK, and I have a few that travel throughout Europe and have a few residences. Um, so there's Swiss base, Denmark, things like that. They often will let me know when they're in town, and then we can arrange a fitting. But that also often will increase the lead times because I might be able to say, yes, your fitting will be ready in 3.5, 4 weeks. But if they're not back in London for 3 months, well, I mean, that's going to really significantly impact when they're actually going to get their suit. And that's just something that we can't work around. I will offer to fly to them, but there's costs associated with that. So it really just depends on the kind of desire of the client to get it done quickly.
Because a lot of tailors, and I know that you do as well, do trunk shows where
Yeah.
you'll travel to other places in order
Yeah.
to hold fittings and things like that.
Yeah, so I've just did my first trunk show in Texas, which I was really pleased about. Looking forward to going back. Trunk shows are their own beast because there are then significant costs that are add to flying out. If you think about it from a logistical standpoint, the worst case scenario for any tailor is to go to a city in the US and only sell one suit because with the amount of fittings that are required, you have to pay for flights and hotels and all the expenses associated with normal business travel. That just eats into any kind of profit that you would see on that suit. Meaning, you need to really have a captive market. You want people who are enthusiastic about what you do. Otherwise, you become a charity, and unfortunately, tailors aren't in it for you know losing money. We have to be a
Of
sustainable
course,
business.
yeah, it's a business.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's like you say, you're not doing this because you want to just give people suits.
Yeah.
It's still a trade.
And I think that it's hard to square that idea when you have such a high price point. But as we said, making suits in central London is incredibly expensive.
What other things make it expensive?
Well, one, you have the just general cost of living. So just for someone to make enough money to survive, they need to price their work fairly high. Two, it is the amount of training that goes into making a suit. Three, it is the level of skill and quality that they produce. Not all coat makers, not all tailoring houses are priced at the same point. And that's for various reasons. One of the reasons on the tailoring side is you might be a new tailor. You're not going to charge as much as someone who's been working for 25 years. So there are a variety of reasons why it's so expensive. Also, because of the limited capacity of each individual person. So, as we know, very basic supply kind of economics, there is a huge demand compared to the relative supply of coat makers, meaning that they can, in part, set a slightly higher price because the tailoring houses will pay it.
That makes sense.
So there's really a lot of different factors that go into why bespoke suiting is so expensive. Ultimately, though, it's if you look at the cost of a suit that's made in a factory overseas, in the hundreds or thousands, that factory is probably producing the entire suit for less than I pay for the cloth
Oh, wow.
for one of my bespoke clients. It's that element of, if you're, think of how much a suit from Marks and Spencer's cost.
Also, 2024, probably around what, £150,
Yeah, maybe
£200?
$250.
Okay.
That is easily less than what I pay in cloth for a two-piece suit.
Wow. Okay.
So when you look at it from that point of view, if just the cloth costs more than the entire suit, maybe 2 or 3 suits from Marks and Spencer's, then you're going to see that the craftsmanship, the hand making, the hand pressing, all of that is just going to build up to be a fairly expensive artisan made product.
And then would you consider that in that comparison between the Marks and Spencer suit and a bespoke suit from yourself or anyone else, there's the benefit of longevity, the fact that you've established a relationship with the tailor, and I mean, do you get people bringing suits back to have work done on them?
Yeah, so occasionally, some of my guys will have lost weight. They'll need something altered. That's fine. We obviously will mend suits, which, that's no problem. I like to think of bespoke suiting as multi-generational, that we've built them in a way that they can survive to be handed down. They'll survive to the next generation. That might not necessarily be what the next generation wants. They might not want to, that style of suit, but that's how we try to make them. It's also, as I said at the beginning, if you have an interest in how the garment is made, the working conditions, the livelihoods, how, really, and this has happened, it's not often, but some of my clients have had a beer with their coat maker. They've got to meet the person who put together their suit.
That's pretty cool.
That's just an added element of the whole experience, that you can have that connection. And then we do other things, and one of my favorite examples of something that we really did to turn a bespoke suit into a family heirloom was, I had the idea of getting my client to give me some birthday cards that his children had written for him. And we copied the signatures, but we didn't want it to be overt, so we put it inside the jacket here under the lining. So just under the lining, he and his children are the only ones who actually seen it in person, was his children's signatures.
Oh, how wonderful.
That takes it from being a bespoke suit that was made 10 years ago or something, to being a time capsule of, this is what my child's signature looked like when they were this, 10 years old or 7 years old or however old they were. It makes it so much more special. And that, to the son or daughter who actually has their name in that jacket, I think that creates that desirability of saying, I want that because not only did my father wear that, but he wore it with my name in it every single day.
How sweet.
Isn't that not like, so there's ways of really adding so much meaning to what a bespoke suit could be.
100%. Yeah, and it's something that becomes so personal.
Exactly.
And perhaps the child will inherit that suit and
Yeah.
it continues to live through them.
Yeah, and exactly. And hopefully, whether it's to wear or even just to keep as an heirloom.
And then that cost becomes so so small because it's lived for longer than
Exactly.
a ready-to-wear garment might have.
Totally. And so there's so many reasons to buy a bespoke suit that we couldn't go into all of them. But ultimately, it's about buying something that is not only made for you specifically. Even if you said, can you remake this cloth? You know, if you, Jack, said, I want your bespoke suit in this same exact Loro Piana seersucker, it wouldn't be the exact same suit. It would be for you. You would choose some of the style details. We would make things that are only unique to you. So you really can't walk around with someone else's suit. It's yours.
Excellent point. When it comes to a suit, would you go for flapped or jetted pockets?
Flapped.
Two-piece or three-piece?
Two-piece for me.
Single or double-breasted?
I like single. I like a three-roll too.
Uh-huh.
It's just a little bit more comfortable for me. I like the silhouette. I like it's a bit more casual, but you can still dress it up. So yeah, three-roll two, single-breasted all day long.
And if you had one piece of advice for a bespoke customer, what would it be?
Don't go to a place that you think you should go to. A lot, and this is very true when I was on Savile Row, we would have people come in and say, hey, I'm going here. I want to ask you some questions, and then I'm going to go next door and go all the way down the row and see who's best for me. And that's probably the best thing you can do. Ultimately, we all have our own style. We all have our own tastes and our preferences. And I would say think of choosing a tailor like you naturally choose the friend circles that you have. Things click. I don't want to go and hang out with someone just because they represent something that is appealing. I just want things to be easy. I want to enjoy the time I'm with my tailor. So go in there, ask questions, and see if they're right for you.
Awesome. Matthew, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Good to see you.